What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over Hitboxes Part 2, in which case we'll be able to determine which direction our player is facing, and then be able to perform an action based on that, such as spawn a hitbox in that location. So last time we could only spawn it to the right of the player, which of course is not what we want. We want to be able to face left or right and put out a hitbox that does damage. We're also going to be going over making the character always face left or right. We can make this a smoother transition in the future, and I'll show you how to do it. There's a reason in particular I'm not doing it now. It's just some decisions I have to make behind the scenes that I'll elaborate on later. But for now, we're just going to force the character to face left or right when we're moving that direction. We'll have no in-between. That way you won't be able to spawn a hitbox in some random location. And then also we will go ahead and make sure that different hitboxes can be made easily through a function. And you can actually perform them that do different damage. See, this attack does 32% damage. This attack does 15% damage. And if I can land the jump attack, I might be able to do it right here. You ready? Nope. There it is, and you see that attack does 10% damage. So my three attacks all do different damage. They all have different locations that they spawn and things like that. So let's get out of this and get started. Ignore this window for now. This is still about the setting focus to the user widget in the character select screen, which will be fixed in the gamepad episode. Okay. What we mainly need to do today is disable our player from being able to rotate fully, or if we do a full rotation, we need to make sure he snaps to left and right if the player releases the control in between. That way you don't have this weird spot where the character is looking directly at the camera and their hitboxes are spawning there. Okay. In your SSB template character, or whatever you've called your basic default character that you have that you're going to use as the parent for your character. If you look in the constructor here, so go to your CPP file, you'll see there's a bunch of stuff in here. We didn't set any of this, right? This came default when we used the template. You might notice on mine I changed some comments and things like that just to make it clearer for those reading, but you don't have to change the comments or anything. These guys are they just tell you what's going on in the code, so just like a little bit of documentation. There are a few things we need to change here though, particularly this option, get character movement, be orient rotation to movement. I'll explain what that is in a second. What this is saying, this get character movement line, it's grabbing the character movement component of the character. So simply enough, if you have a character in the scene, and if I spawn one here, I'll show you. If you can look on the right hand side here, if I find my characters, now these are my player controllers, should have actual characters that got spawned. They have a character movement component attached to them. So whenever you see this in the code like this, or even in Blueprint, it'll be slightly different in Blueprint because you just get a get character movement node and then drag off of it. But if you see this, that's what it's referring to. It's referring to the get or the character movement component. I just wanted to bring that up because we haven't talked about anything in the constructor yet, other than the variables we added. But this stuff that's all here, just default values they're setting for you. You could remove it all if you want and set your own, but I'd advise leaving most of it alone. This one, however, should be true by default. We want to set it to false. So orient rotation to movement is what determines if the player is going to be rotating if they're switching directions. So if we were to have this at true, this would be what you saw in previous episodes, where if we're running to the right, our character's facing right. When we press left, our character starts rotating left. However, he will stop in the middle and just stare at the screen if I release the left arrow key at that point. And we don't want that. We don't want the character to stop. We want him to be either facing left or facing right. Again, we can make it neater than we are now, and that's fine, But we don't want him to be able to stop and stare at the screen, because then his hitboxes would completely miss. And if you're generally in a 2D battle, and I mean, I say generally because there are some exceptions where, oh, this special stage has this 3D effect or something, and you can implement that later. But if you're generally in a 2D battle, then you don't want them to be any other directions but facing left and facing right. So that's why we set this to false. Now, once you set this to false, your character will remain the direction they are facing permanently. So they will be right. They will be facing right forever until we set logic to change that. Okay. Well, they'll be facing whatever the rotation of the player start is, I should say. By default, I believe it's to the right. I don't think I changed them. I just brought them into the scene. Now, what we need to do is keep track of what direction we are facing. So if you go into your header file, if you go down to where you made your booleans here, then you can see that the is facing right variable is new. I've added this to determine if we're facing right or if we're facing left. It can be just a boolean. You don't really need any other options. Just if he's not facing right, he's facing left. If he is facing right, then obviously he's facing right. So that covers all our bases. So go ahead and make this boolean, make it U property, edit anywhere, of course, just so we can see it in Blueprint. We can always remove it later. Okay. Then go into your SSB template character, CPP again, and then the move right function. So you'll have this whether you've been watching the tutorial series or not, simply because this is part of the default character. It comes with the template. Move right is the function that gets put on your axis mapping to determine what your value is if you're moving left or right. So it has this float value parameter here, and we can use that to determine if the key press was a left or a right key press, and that's how we know if the player or the character should be moving left or right. So this add movement input will already be in here, just like this. We need to add everything below that. So we need to check if the value is less than 0. If the value is less than 0, then the player is not facing right. They're going to be facing left. So we want to set their actor rotation to whatever in your scene is the left rotation. Now, it will depend on what your map looks like. So if we go to it. Alright, so I'm at my player spawns here in my level. Now you can see they're all facing the same direction. The arrow that goes off the controller is the direction they're technically facing. This guy is too. He's just a little bit into the wall. I'll bring him over there so you can see him. So the rotation that matters for me is the z-axis. And you can tell this by if you click on rotation, if you click on the player start and then click on this button, select and rotate objects, you can see that this one right here, the blue one, is the one I want to rotate if I want to change the direction he's going to be facing that I care about. I don't care if he's up or down because it's not a 3D game, right? I just care about if he's facing left or right. So you don't have to switch anything with that if you want. I'm just letting you know that that's how you can tell. So if I go over to my rotation on my z-axis, and I know it's my z-axis because z is color-coded as blue, and blue was the rotation ring I was telling you about. So this is my z-axis. So if I go on my player start and look at my z rotation, it's -90. So we know -90 is facing right by default, which means that 270 is facing right by default, if you don't want to use negative coordinates. -90 is the same as 270. You can see nothing changed when I changed it to 270. And then the other instance of that is, okay, if 270 degrees is right, then 90 degrees is to my left. So we'll do it on this guy. Regular 90, not -90. You can see the arrow is now facing left. Now I'm going to revert this because I don't want it that way. But you can see that that's how you can figure out your rotations that you want and need. You don't have to do that. You can make them whatever you want. Just make sure if he's going to be at a rotation where he'll be facing left, or your character will be facing left, then is facing right is false. And if it's going to be at a character, if your character is going to be at a rotation where you're facing right, then is facing right is true. All you have to do to actually change the actor's rotation is a function called set actor rotation, We don't make this function or anything. Your character will be able to call it by default. Okay. So set active rotation, and then you have to set up like this. F rotator, because we're making an F rotator type. Set active rotation takes in an F rotator, and an F rotator is just basically a vector. It's 3 values for an X, Y, and Z that determine your rotation. So 0 on the X, 90 on the Y, 0 on the Z. And then the same with this. 0 on the X, 270 on the Y, 0 on the Z. Okay, so now we're able to successfully move our character and rotate them accordingly. There's nothing else we're doing in code. So we should only be able to face left or right, our little mannequin guy. I'm going to scroll up to the top here, and we're done with the code section for today. The other section we have is pretty short, so nothing to worry about. I'm going to close this guy out. Now, it's in our anim BP. If you guys remember the anim BP, this is where we were setting up the hitboxes before. I haven't switched anything around with down here. I did move these over, just so they're not all over top of our other things in the event graph, simply because I'm going to be adding more and more, and it was going to collide with these, so I figured I'll just move it out of its way, and we can go as far as we want. Haven't added anything to the deleting of the hitboxes or anything like that. That's perfectly fine. But what I am going to do is change the create active hitbox function we had. Now, I mentioned that this was part 2 of hitboxes. If you want to see part 1 of hitboxes, the other stuff wasn't going to matter for that, but this stuff will. This stuff was created in episode 1 of the hitbox actor, so I'm not going to be going over all of it. I'm just going to show you the changes. So if you want to see episode 1 of that, I'll leave an iCard in the top right corner right now. You can click on to see episode 1 of hitboxes in this tutorial series. Otherwise, let's go into the create active hitbox function. You'll already see some things are different about it, and I'll show you what I changed. So the core function itself is the same. In fact, the only thing I've changed is this section right here, which I know looks a little messy, but I think I'll be able to help you follow that a little bit better, and the input parameters. So before, what I was doing is I was setting the hitbox type manually to strike, I was setting the hitbox damage manually to 15, and I was setting the hitbox location manually to somewhere to the player's right, the character's right. We're going to change all 3 of those things. You can see I have type, damage, and offset Y, because we're going to make them more dynamic. So we can call the create active hitbox function and change things about them every single time. We're also going to make it that depending on the player is facing left or right, the offset that gets passed in is going to either be on the character's left or the character's right. Let's get into it. Go back into your event graph, and if you click on create active hitbox, you can see it should just say target as of now. We want to add 3 inputs. So make 3 new parameters, click this 3 times, and then we need to search for different things. The first one we need is our hitbox type. Right now we only have strike and hurtbox, but you could add projectiles, throws, things like that. So we want to include this. It's not always going to be strike, so we don't want to hard code it. So look for your hitbox enum that we made in the first episode. If you don't remember, I'll just show you real quick. It is right here. This is our hitbox enum. Okay, so that's the variable type, so just look for that right here. And I just called it type. Then just use a regular integer and call it damage. And then I called it offset Y, that is a regular float. You can do a full offset if you wanted to change the height, like where it spawns. So if the player does an uppercut, it might spawn or be stretched out a little bit more than just the standard jab. That's perfectly fine. For now, I'm just worried about the positioning if the character is facing left or right, so I just have offset Y. Feel free, instead of passing a float, to pass in an entire vector, like this, and that'll have an X, Y, and Z, and you can set all the values and pass it into this hitbox. Then, when you're in the actual function, you'll have these 3 nodes now, and we're just going to bring them to their respective boxes. So this part's pretty easy. The hitbox type we were setting to strike before, we're going to take the type and now drag it over. If you want to make these little reroute nodes so you can make it nice and neat, just double click anywhere in your line, you can make a new one. And delete that one because I think it's ugly, but there you go. So type goes into hitbox type, damage goes into hitbox damage. You can see the highlighted line is going in there. And offset Y is going to go into offset Y, but you can see it's going to be a little bit different. So let's go over this logic to wrap up this episode. Now, we have our character reference. Again, if you were following along, then you'll already have this. If you're not following along, all you need to do to get this character reference is in the update animation / begin play, go ahead and check if the pawn owner is valid, cast to the character class that is the owner of this class, or just get the owner of this class, either way, and then set the character reference. Character reference should just be the type of the character that is going to be spawned using this AnimVP. Just a refresher there. So this character reference has all the variables that we set in our code class because it's a reference to that code class, which means he'll have is facing right as long as you've made the Boolean, made sure it was blueprint read right, built in Visual Studio, and then compiled in Unreal. So go ahead, grab your character reference, bring it onto the screen like this, type is facing right, get it, and then drag off of this into a branch. Okay, and that's what I've done right below it, so I'm deleting this. Now, if he's facing right, we want to set the hitbox location to these values. If he's facing left, we want to set the hitbox location to these values. And then both of them, we want to still spawn the hitbox and add this hitbox to the list of active hitboxes. Okay, so the only thing that's changed here, like I said, is this branch and the way I'm setting the hitbox location. Now, this weird structure I have here, this is the player transform. We were using this before. If you drag it on screen like this, then you'll see it. This is what we were using before to set the hitbox location. You can go ahead and right click and split the struct pin to get the different values that comprise this structure. And we're also going to split the location. That's what we care about right now. We don't actually care about the rotation or the scale. We might later. For now, we don't. So that's how I got this node. So I'll delete this one. And we're just going to either subtract or add the value that our offset Y is based on if they're facing left or right. So here's offset Y. You can see it gets brought over to this reroute node. So you can see whatever is in this node right here, this is offset Y. So if the player is facing right, true, this box right here, then we want to subtract the offset Y from our player transform location Y. You can see player transform location Y goes into the subtraction box. If you want to copy it exactly, just pull off of this node, hit the minus sign, and hit float minus minus. You'll get this node here. It'll say -1 by default, then drag in the offset Y value that we brought in to the bottom node of that subtraction. Then, I tried to make this as neat as possible. It gets brought into the hitbox location Y on the is facing right side. However, if is facing right is false, meaning they're facing left, we want to add the values together. So, do the same thing again. Drag off of transform location Y. Y is the only location we care about right now. Hit the plus sign, and then do float plus float. It'll be +1 by default, but drag off your offset Y into the bottom of the plus, and then you can see this goes into hitbox location Y when the player is facing left. Okay? Now, all you have to do is determine what you want your values to be. So for me, for my basic attack, which is the one I'll do first, I do 15 damage, it's a strike hitbox, and it's an offset of 125 to the Y. Regardless, it's 125 in the direction that I'm facing, basically, left or right. Then, forward attack active is my second attack I can do. It does 32 damage, but has an offset of 100. So it's either 100 left or 100 right. Lastly, I have my jump attack, which it's also, these are all strike hitboxes. It does damage of 10, and it has an offset of 110 in the Y. So, let's play our game. Whoops, we're on the side-scroller map still. Go to our main menu. Yes, we can save that. And let's play our game. So there you go. Now I can bring my characters, and all my characters, they can face left or right. They can do an attack. This is my first attack. It's to the right or to my left. You can see I can hit players on my right, and I can hit players on my left. Now I can also do this attack, which is my forward attack, which does 32% damage. I can do it left or right. And I can even do my jump attack if I can figure out which control is which. There we go. I can even do my jump attack. Oops. And hit him for 10 damage. And I can also do it on the right, although I don't really have a good way to hit somebody on the right, but you can see the hitbox spawns to my right at that point. And all these other characters can also do it. Like that's my hold attack. Sorry, I'm doing all these on a keyboard, so I'm trying to figure out exactly who's who. I also forget the controls for all the characters because I have so many. That's the forward attack for him. That's for him. Yeah, you can see him doing all sorts of different stuff. But my point is, they all have their own... They can all do this. This isn't like you have to set up for each character. We just change the hitbox logic to work that way. So no matter how we're spawning our hitboxes now, as long as we're using that function and passing in values to it, it should work for all cases you have. Now, we will be adding to that function in lots of other episodes, because as you can imagine, there's a lot more we can do with hitboxes than just these random circles on the screen we're spawning. But it's good to be able to position them and create them quickly, as opposed to going over an entire process every time and manually adjusting it. So anyway, guys, that's it for me for today. This is Hitboxes Part 2. In the next episode, we'll probably go over launching characters, but I'm not entirely sure yet. We'll be figuring out exactly what to go over in the next one. But thank you guys so much for watching this video. If it helps you, please subscribe. It's the most important thing you can do for the channel, and it helps me know that I'm doing a good job in teaching you what you want to learn. If you had any issues with this series, or if you had any issues with this tutorial, or any of the tutorials in this series, then feel free to join the Discord. I can't leave an iCard, but it is in the description if you want to join. I'd be happy to help you out with any issues you have. So it's a little bit easier than YouTube comments because we can post pictures and videos. Lastly, guys, if you want to come support us on Twitch, twitch.tv/Shawnthebro27. We've been playing Dark Souls 2 recently, which has been a ton of fun. We just beat Fume Knight, which I'm excited about. And Resident Evil 7 has been going very well. We're actually on Madhouse difficulty, and so far so good. We're making solid progress. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.